The search for the shards of the Mirror of Twilight leads Link and Midna into the far reaches of the Gerudo Desert, where lies the ruins of the Arbiter's grounds, a dark place where Hyrule's worst criminals were imprisoned and executed. It was here that, long before the events of Twilight Princess, the Gerudo king, Ganondorf, was sentenced to death by the sages and impaled by a sacred blade. But by some cruel twist of fate, the Dark Lord lived on, and the sages were forced to seal him away through the Mirror of Twilight. By the time Link arrives at the Arbiter's grounds, the undead crawl through it like worms through a rotten apple. Gibdos and Stalfos shuffle through sandy corridors, and in the dark corners of great halls, the ghostly shapes of Pose dance in the dusty air. But in one particular chamber, deep in the bowels of this accursed place, something else lurks. Something more powerful, more mysterious. A great blade, impaled in the ancient stone floor, held in the middle of a web of ropes adorned with ofuda, talismans designed to ward off evil. Whatever this is, it was dangerous enough to have been carefully sealed away, and perhaps it would have remained that way for an age, until the temple it was trapped within crumbled to dust around it. When Link enters the chamber, though, he cuts one of the ropes binding the sword, and it wakes. The ancient runes carved onto the blade glow with an eerie red light, and the remaining ropes burn away. An unseen hand lifts the sword from its resting place and swings it violently around the room, narrowly missing the hero and the Twilight Princess. This is the mini-boss of the Arbiter's grounds, a battle seemingly against an animated weapon. But by transforming into his wolf form and using the beast's heightened senses, Link can see the true form of his foe, a towering, cloaked figure with a head like that of a skeletal goat. This is Deathsword, one of the creepiest bosses in the Zelda series. But despite its importance, it's never explained. Twilight Princess never reveals the backstory or lore of this phantom, but there are hints, allowing us to piece together a theory on the origins and true identity of Deathsword. Deathsword is the mini-boss of the Arbiter's grounds, fought in the room in which Link unlocks the spinner, and immediately it becomes clear that Deathsword is not a regular enemy. Link must initiate the fight himself, by breaking the seals that keep the monster imprisoned here. Above all else, this is the most interesting and unsettling aspect of Deathsword, that it was dangerous enough to be locked away, here in a prison at the edge of the world. We can infer that Deathsword's physical form, its horned head, red-tipped claws, and flowing black cloak, is spiritual in nature, evidenced by the fact that before being damaged, it can only be sensed by Wolf Link, just like the spirits cast in Twilight or Pose. But the sword itself is real. It exists apart from the ghost, as if it is the physical object the entity was trapped within. Its shape is crude and brutal, a slab of black metal that tapers only slightly towards the hilt. Mysterious, scrawled runes are etched onto the blade, markings that resemble those found throughout the dungeon. The hilt itself is ornate, gilded with intricate patterns, and perhaps most interestingly, the guard appears to bear the symbol of the Triforce. Unlike the Triforce engraved on the Master Sword, however, these triangles are inverted, and would point down if the blade was held skyward. In this, the markings match the inverted Triforce on the blade wielded by Demise, the original Demon King. Considering these design choices, and the fact that this blade is sealed away here in the Arbiter's grounds, there's a strong argument to be made that this weapon once belonged to none other than Ganondorf himself. We don't see what weapon Ganondorf used to wage war before the events of Twilight Princess. By the time he has been captured by the sages and chained in the Arbiter's grounds, he's unarmed. But he is still clad in his plate armor, a suit of ornate, gilded black metal that closely resembles the design of Deathsword. And given that this ruin in the desert was where the Gerudo King was taken after his defeat, it would only make sense for his blade to be taken from him and sealed away here too. After surviving his execution, Ganondorf claimed the radiant Sword of the Six Sages as a trophy to, in his own words, take this foul blade and use it to blot out the light forever. This would be even more poetic had he originally wielded this elegant, luminous sword's exact negative, a crude, brutal sword wrought from dark metal, marked with an inverted Triforce. This theory neatly explains the origins of the Death Sword itself, but it doesn't solve the mystery of who wields it by the time of Twilight Princess, the ghost sealed along with it. On the surface, Death Sword is similar in many ways to another Zelda mini-boss, Gomez, fought in Majora's Mask's Stone Tower Temple. Both are the mini-bosses of desert-themed dungeons, both resemble the Grim Reaper, both disappear into a swarm of flies or bats when defeated, and in the French translation, both share the same name, Faucher. But Death Sword shares a deeper thematic parallel with another boss, one that would solidify the blade's connection with the king of the Gerudo, Phantom Ganon. In every single Zelda game featuring the Gerudo King Ganondorf, he is accompanied by his phantoms, spectral clones of the Dark Lord, manifestations of his hatred wrought from dark magic. In Ocarina of Time, Phantom Ganon appears as the boss of the Forest Temple, wielding a trident, riding forth from paintings on the chamber walls. In The Wind Waker, he is clad in plate armor and wields a great black sword, and in Tears of the Kingdom, Phantom Ganon appears from pools of gloom, often heralded by swarms of gloom hands. The only exception to this is in Twilight Princess, where the closest named equivalent are the Phantom Riders, spectral mounted warriors summoned by Ganondorf during the final battle. While these are likely some form of Phantom Ganon, their heads even resemble the horned look of Phantom Ganon from Ocarina of Time, they're not named as such, and crucially, aren't a boss fight in their own right. Yet, Twilight Princess does feature Death Sword, a phantom boss fight against an unnamed, unexplained foe, lurking in the depths of the very place where Ganondorf was imprisoned. Death Sword's design doesn't match Ganondorf's in the same way Phantom Ganon usually does, but there are design elements that call back to the Demon King. Like Ocarina of Time's Phantom, its head is skeletal, with large, prominent horns. And Death Sword's robe might offer another clue. This also displays the inverted Triforce symbol seen on the blade, again evoking the Great Sword of Demise seen in Skyward Sword. In the original Japanese, Death Sword is named the Sword of Gobera. This term Gobera doesn't translate to anything, it's a proper noun, so it appears to be the name of the sword, or the spirit that wields it. Yet this term has never appeared elsewhere in the Zelda series. Death Sword's original name is as much of a mystery as the entity itself. However, a somewhat similar term does appear in The Wind Waker, where Phantom Ganon's sword is etched with the words Zabora Gabora. Of course, this is a callback to Majora's Mask, to the blacksmiths in the mountain village, Zabora and Gabora. Gobera is, of course, a different word to Gabora, but it's similar enough to be notable. especially when coupled with the similarities between the Death Sword itself and the blade carried by the Wind Waker's Phantom Ganon, both great slabs of black metal. Could Gobera be a corruption of Gabora? Another clue suggesting that Death Sword is indeed a creation of Ganondorf's hatred. The final clue to Death Sword's identity could be how it fights. The first phase of the battle involves the spectre swinging the blade, and can be defeated by latching on and biting with Wolflink while it's weak. Once it has materialized, Death Sword will begin the next phase, first floating around the boss chamber, summoning orbs of dark magic and hurling them at the hero, where it can be damaged with the bow, and then flying quickly to appear behind Link and attempting to hit him with the sword. This is incredibly similar to Phantom Ganon's moveset in The Wind Waker. Just like Death Sword, Phantom Ganon floats around the arena before casting orbs of magic towards him in a game of Dead Man's Volley, one of Ganondorf and Phantom Ganon's signature moves, but also appears behind Link to damage him with his sword. The magic projectiles of Death Sword cannot be reflected in the same way as the Phantom Ganon fight, yet it feels like this fight is trying to evoke the same feelings as in this encounter. Perhaps what we're seeing here is the result of a Phantom Ganon being sealed for an age, a rotten, twisted shadow, any semblance of what it once was long forgotten, save for its hatred and bloodlust. There's an interesting parallel between Death Sword and Azazel, a demon mentioned in Abrahamic texts, which might allow us to infer more about its history. The first book of Enoch describes Azazel as a fallen angel, responsible for corrupting mankind with the knowledge of forging weapons and armor. And Azazel is also mentioned in Leviticus, where the tradition of the scapegoat is outlined. One goat would be sacrificed for God, and another, symbolically bearing sin, was sent into the wilderness for Azazel. Twilight Princess never reveals how, when, or by whom Death Sword was sealed here in the Arbiter's grounds, but the Book of Enoch explains that Azazel was sealed by the Archangel Raphael. This is where the parallels get really interesting. Raphael was told to bind Azazel hand and foot and cast him into the darkness, and make an opening in the desert and cast him therein, and place upon him rough and jagged rocks, and cover him with darkness, and let him abide there forever, and cover his face so that he may not see light. Death Sword isn't just a goat-headed demon sealed in the desert, he's also covered in darkness. His boss chamber is blanketed in a perpetual shadow. But most crucially of all, Azazel's face was covered so that he may not see light. And at the beginning of the battle, before Death Sword can be seen without wolf senses, his cloak covers his face like a mask. If Death Sword is indeed a form of Phantom Ganon, sealed within the blade once wielded by Ganondorf himself, then parallels to Azazel make perfect sense. Before the events of Twilight Princess, the Dark Lord attempted to conquer Hyrule, spreading war and bloodshed across the land. And here, in the shadowy depths of his execution site, lurks a ghost of this war, a goat demon, sealed in the desert in the dark. But sealed by whom? Link first learns of the Arbiter's grounds from Oru, an old man, who might have a deeper connection to the mysteries of the desert and the evils within than he lets on. Link first encounters him atop a tower at Lake Hylia, observing the western desert. He says, "The Gerudo Desert once held a prison built to hold the worst criminals this land has ever known. The criminals who were sentenced to death were sent directly to the underworld by a cursed mirror that was kept in the prison. Now that prison is condemned, and even the road leading to the desert is impassable. This desert at World's End, it still holds the cursed mirror and the malice of the doomed inmates. These old bones know that the evil currently plaguing Hyrule is related to this wicked place. Clearly, Oru has a long history with the Gerudo Desert, and the execution site that lies there. After Link ventures there and recovers the shard of the Mirror of Twilight, he'll say, "The sages. Those sages once served the royal family, actually. They were appointed as tutors to the young Princess Zelda. It was from them that I first heard tales of the accursed mirror in the Arbiter's grounds." But this is actually a mistranslation. Originally, Oru explains that he was Princess Zelda's tutor, and that it was back then that he learned about the Mirror of Twilight. This makes Oru far more important, and reveals a deep connection to Hyrule's royal family that we didn't know before. It also casts a new light on his English name. It is one letter away from Rauru, the name of the Sage of Light in Ocarina of Time, and the King of Light in Tears of the Kingdom. Both figures with obvious connections to the royal family. It doesn't seem likely that Oru is the Sage of Light in Twilight Princess, however. Link meets with them after completing the Arbiter's grounds, where they tell Link the story of Ganondorf's exile. Yet, Oru's original name seems to connect him with Azazel, and by extension, the Arbiter's grounds and Death Sword. In Japanese, the Archangel Raphael is named Rafaeru, and Oru is named Rafureru, or Rafrel. For Death Sword to have so many parallels to Azazel, and Oru to be named so similarly to the Archangel who sealed it, surely this can't just be coincidence. Well, despite what it might seem, I don't think that his Japanese name is enough to suggest that Oru himself was the one to seal Death Sword in the Arbiter's grounds. He is old, but not ancient, and Ganondorf's banishment seems to have taken place generations before the events of Twilight Princess. Instead, his name simply strengthens the parallels to Azazel, and positions Oru as a direct counterpart to the demon in the blade, a force of light to guide Link as he ventures into the darkness. To me, it seems most likely that Death Sword was imprisoned here by the Arbiters themselves, the sages who attempted to execute Ganondorf. That when Ganondorf was defeated and brought to this place in chains, his own sword, and the violent entity within it, was sealed away here by the Six, to rot, forgotten in the darkness. Until the light of another sword cut through the shadows. Until the blade of evil's bane, the Master Sword, was brought here to bring death to Death Sword. Thanks for watching this video. If you liked it, leave a like, and subscribe if you haven't already for more Zelda content. This video is a remake of a video I made on Death Sword many years ago. Not only does this version have a much better production value, but I also included a ton of extra details and context for this mystery. I hope you enjoyed it. Cheers guys, and I'll see you next time.